Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Hey, movie fans! Do you wish your favorite films had less DEI? Introducing the White Tyrion Collection, a new home video service from the Trump administration. Get ready for 12 years of what have you, Marvel's Panther, and really hidden figures. Psst, they're behind the armoire. And Brokeback Mountain, the inspiring story of two Wyoming cowboys who herded cattle and nothing else. And hey, sports fans, we've got all your favorite films from the gridiron and the court, like White Men Can Jump the Best, Remember That One Titan, and Cool Runnings, the inspiring true story of an Olympic bobsled with no one in it. And of course, who can forget Disney's Encanto? You can. It doesn't exist anymore. Get your favorite Trump-approved movies from the White Tyrion Collection today. And act now, because watching the originals will soon be considered domestic terrorism.
Hello, and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the hot cross bun to our midweek full vegan lamb roast. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex. Christos Anesti.
Alithos o Kyrios.
Very good.
Thank you for teaching me that.
Because unusually, like it only happens once every few years.
Yeah.
The Greek Easter is on the same day as Easter here. This
I
year.
would wager that 99% of people in the UK don't know what determines when Church of England Easter is or Catholic Easter. Like most people don't know why it changes.
It's basically 40 days from another moving holiday. So there's a moving holiday that's like the beginning of Lent.
Right.
And you count 40 days from there to find Easter. But and it moves every year by a week. It gets later and later and later, and then goes back to the sort of early spring.
Yeah.
But because they're slightly out of sync, they're rarely on the same week, the Greek Orthodox one and the English one. And next year, they will be really far apart. Like the Greek one will be even later in the year, while the English one has returned to the really early season. So anyway,
all I care about is having a 4-day weekend, Alex.
I'm getting such gorgeous photos from Greece at the moment. My entire family, everyone except me, are all gathered together on the island of Samos. And the weather is absolutely gorgeous, apparently. They're all swimming and they're sending me loads of photos, and I feel insanely jealous.
I'm sorry, that must be really tough. But at least we're having pretty good weather here, or have done for the last fortnight.
That's true. And I've been pottering around the roof garden, doing all my planting and my pruning and all of that. So it's been nice. It's been nice. Oh, and a happy Passover to any who celebrate the Jews holiday. Chag Sameach.
Indeed, yes. Whatever you're celebrating or not celebrating, we hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Now, we're going to take this opportunity to ask you guys, not for an Easter egg, but for a little hatch of a present. Sign up to support us on Ko-Fi for less than the price of an Easter egg. And if you do, our next Ask Us Anything live Zoom will be available to you. It is on Tuesday, the 22nd, over lunchtime from 12:30 till 1:30. And provided you sign up before Monday, you will get an invite to that. So it's ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod.
And they're always a lot of fun, the Ask Us Anything sessions. We really do get to know each other, know our audience, and we've had some very, very funny questions.
And we've had some wonderful dogs and cats.
Yes, we have some great dogs and cats making appearances on the Zoom. And please make an extra effort to indoctrinate friends and relatives who might have a bit more free time over the long weekend to come over to the Church of Quiet Riot. Also, follow us, rate us on as many apps as you use for your podcast. Every little helps.
We're not as culty as that brief intro sounded, but I guess we do have a Sunday school edition every week, which does give off culty vibes, I guess. Look, as we promised, today we're going to talk about that Supreme Court decision on the legal definition of woman under the Equality Act. So we're going to try and do that as tactfully and as carefully as we can. You know, we know that there are strong views around this subject, and we have strong views too, but
we're going to fail.
We ask more questions than have answers.
Yeah, look, we're going to fail. I think that's a given. There's going to be people upset that we're not more absolutely on their side. There's going to be people upset that perceive us to be on the opposite side. But I'm not a trans person. You're not a trans person. We have a lot of questions. We're trying to understand. We're trying to learn. And we hope that you take our views in that spirit.
Indeed.
So then, pretty notably, the Trump White House have made a sort of announcement that they're a bit over the whole Ukraine thing, apparently. And I think we will have quite a lot to say about that too.
And if we get time, let's dip into the rumours of a potential returns agreement that's being thrashed out between the UK and France over asylum seekers.
Okay, let's do this thing.
Quiet Riot.
So the Supreme Court ruled this week that when the term woman is used in the Equality Act, it means a biological woman and sex means biological sex. Kishore Faulkner, the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, will refer to them as that from now on, just for brevity, said, and I quote, "We are going to have a new statutory code of practice, statutory meaning it will be the law of the land. It will be interpreted by courts as the law of the land. We're hoping we're going to have that by the summer." So that's a pretty instant reaction. The campaign group Scottish Trans said, "We are really shocked by today's Supreme Court decision, which reverses 20 years of understanding of how the law recognizes trans men and women with gender recognition certificates. We will continue working for a world in which trans people can get on with their lives with privacy, dignity, and safety. That is something we all deserve." Susan Smith, the co-founder of For Women Scotland, the group that won the Supreme Court case on Wednesday, said that the overreach had essentially come from trans groups and some trans activists who became more aggressive and provocative in women's spaces. And I quote here, "If people could have been a little bit more sensible, this wouldn't have happened." Right. So let's first of all, I think, tackle the fact that there is some misreporting of this. So I've noticed that straight away. Even the BBC, their tagline is, and I quote, "The UK Supreme Court has ruled that the legal definition of a woman should be based on biological sex." That's not true as far as I can see. The judges ruled that the term woman, as used in the Equality Act, means a biological woman and sex means biological sex. And they cited specific reasons they did this within the Equalities Act, right? So they said that there are provisions in the Equalities Act that meant to separate classes would be created for trans people with a recognition certificate and without a gender recognition certificate. So that was one of the reasons that they found as they did. There was a second reason in which they said that a lot of the protections in the Equality Act had to do with maternity, with pregnancy, with, women's reproductive health. That meant, again, it would be very confusing for two definitions to exist within the Act. And as a third thing, they also found that within the Equalities Act, this is their view, I don't personally agree, but they said there are adequate protections for trans people on all the various categories, basically, of discrimination that could occur. So it's very act-specific, and what I've seen is a tendency from media outlets and a lot of sort of campaigning groups and individuals to present it as now the legal definition in all cases of this. I don't think it is that. And I think one of the ways we will see it tested in the years to come will be in the context of other acts that also contain the term.
Indeed.
But define it differently, right?
Yeah. As I understood it, and look, as you said, neither of us is trans, but you are a lawyer and I am not. But as I read it, it was asking a very specific question of the Supreme Court, which is, how does the Equality Act interact with the Gender Recognition Act? That was the exam question put to them. If someone given a gender recognition certificate as female, do they count as a woman under the Equality Act or not? You're right. In their judgment, they've tried to make it very clear that trans people are still protected by the Equality Act, but they interpret the Equality Act saying sex means sex assigned at birth. And as you say, the reasons are that when you look at a lot of the sex-based protections within the EA, they are about pregnancy, they are about maternity rights. And so they are interpreting the Equality Act to mean women assigned woman at birth. And also pointed out that sex appointed at birth or on a GRC are different. Of course, it does erode some of the rights that trans people had. So, for instance, one of the things that the Equality Act does is to try and say what you can and can't discriminate as an employer for, or when you are reporting on sex-based discrimination. So salary reporting, you report on men's salaries, women's salaries, and that allows us to see whether there is discrimination in aggregate in the workplace between what women get paid for a role versus what men get paid for a role. And now what it's saying is that a trans woman or a trans man will be counted as a man and a woman because that was their gender assigned at birth, even though that is not their gender now, and they may or may not have a gender recognition certificate for it. And of course, then it also means about single-sex spaces and trans people not being allowed to use the toilet of their transition gender. So it throws up all sorts of issues for employers and how to deal with this. And if you're an employer, as I am, if you have a trans person working for you and they are now no longer, say it as a trans woman, allowed to use a single-sex women's toilet, well, they may not feel safe using the men's toilet. The men may not want a trans woman using the men's toilet. And you may therefore be saying, well, you've got to use the disabled loo. And then you could have a disabled employee saying, you're discriminating against me by allowing this non-disabled person to use my toilet, meaning I may not be able to use it when I need to. You are discriminating against me. And also you're basically trying to tell trans people that they are somehow not able-bodied. I mean, it is opening up a whole new raft of issues in reality and in practice. And that is not even getting into the ethics of it, just into the sort of bare practicalities of it. And here is Kishore Faulkner on the Today programme talking in a very muddled way about everything I've just been talking about as an employer.
Give us an example, though, so it becomes real for people.
Well, I think we'll have to flesh this out in the reasoning. But I think if you were to have an equal pay claim, then depending on which aspect of of it that it was, you could use sex discrimination legislation.
So trans people would be able to...
Can I give you another
please.
harder example, a clearer example? If a trans person was fired, lost their employment because they happened to be trans, that would be unlawful.
Still, clearly.
Absolutely unlawful. And we stand ready to support those people and those claims.
When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof, like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business, making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
Quiet riot. The net result, I think, which is what worries me, is that it means like a trans woman today will not be sure what they're meant to do and where they're meant to go, right? Which is the human dimension of this. The way it's being presented as a sort of win for women, I don't see what the win is. So I would really be grateful if we could kick around this idea, like really try and get into the mindset of the people who feel very, very strongly against, the gender critical crowd, I guess. What is the win for them?
So nobody benefits. Let's just be clear about that. Nobody's lives are going to be made better by this judgment, but some people's lives will be made worse and they will be put in danger.
Is that genuinely they're trying to take their point of view? Would they not say that their lives are improved because they now feel they have the safety of, as they see it, properly single-sex spaces?
Maybe, but it won't. It won't do that. Because what about very masculine presenting women? What about incredibly tall women? Right? They now are much more likely to be challenged walking into a women's refuge, a women's toilet, than previously. They legitimately can now be challenged. Who is going to make the judgment? Who gets to say, sorry, can you take your trousers down? Can you lift up your top, trans man, to show me that you've got scars on your pecs where your breasts used to be? I mean, it is absolutely insane. We had a very recent example of it in that poor boxer, Imaine Khalif, who people like J.K. Rowling savaged in the press long before she was then forced to prove that she was cisgendered woman at birth. So we are talking about making an assumption based on how people present. And there are three components to biological sex. You have your chromosomes, your hormones, and your genitals. And all three get used to classify you as being female, male, or intersex. And there is ample evidence out there that chromosomal differences go way beyond XX and XY. Alex, you assume you are XY. I assume I am XX. But we've got no idea. I haven't had a chromosomal test. True. You haven't. We don't walk around with a little card that we have to show before we use the toilet to be like, yep, XX, I'm allowed in. And so what they're doing is assuming the stability of chromosomes, but accepting that hormones and genitals can change. And it's the hormones and genitals that are what you see and what you will be judged on to assume whether or not you can or can't access a space, not the thing that the Supreme Court has now said is totally fixed and cannot ever possibly be changed. And God knows what intersex people are meant to do. I mean, and who is the arbiter?
That was precisely the point made by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Because there was actually a situation where Boebert and Mace, the two Republican congresswomen, really trying to exclude the one transgender person in Congress from female toilets. There was actually an incident where they sort of called for security because they said a man was in the women's toilet. And let's have a listen.
Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is tackling a key issue driving the high cost of living for Coloradans: whether the one transgender woman in Congress is using the right bathroom. Today, a reporter for Bloomberg News witnessed Boebert bursting out of a women's room at the Capitol, complaining to security that there was a guy in the bathroom, and then returning to investigate with Representative Nancy Mace, who led the crusade to block their transgender colleague from using the women's bathroom. The Bloomberg reporter said that Boebert and Mace emerged from the bathroom after concluding their investigation of the gender of the people within. Not sure what all that entailed, but no guy in the women's room. Boebert sent us a statement about her restroom inquisition, saying it was a case of mistaken identity, that she's learned a lesson, and she said it won't happen again.
After that, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, and I think this is a really good point, and I quote, "They're not doing this to protect people, they're endangering women, they're endangering girls of all kinds, and everybody should reject it. It's gross. The idea that Nancy Mace wants little girls and women to drop trow in front of who? An investigator? Who would that be? It's disgusting." I guess while I understand the intellectual objections and I understand the philosophical objections and I understand a particular wave of feminism objections, and I understand in particular lesbian women's objections, in practice, it always comes down to how does that person present. If effectively a trans woman presents convincingly as a woman, and all of that in quotes, then she will never get challenged and she will never have any issue, and has been using female toilets, for years.
Whereas some incredibly butch women will be.
Exactly. They will be challenged. And this will be used, I think, as a wedge to begin to reduce women again down to their genitals. And I think that's a real danger that diminishes everyone.
I am not safer. I am a woman. I am a cisgendered woman, assigned that at birth, have lived like that my entire life. I have, I'm not trans. I don't feel the need to transition. I'm happy being a woman. I don't feel safer. This hasn't made me safer. The instances where a trans person has made me feel uncomfortable is zero. The times a cisgendered straight man has made me feel uncomfortable is every single day of my life for the last 4 decades. I mean, I cannot stress enough to you how no woman walks down any street without feeling at some point uncomfortable every single day. And to your point about the presenting, there is, of course, you really get to the nub of it when you go down that logic path, because the earlier somebody transitions, the more likely they are to pass very, very convincingly as a cisgendered woman, even if they are a trans woman. And yet it is the same gender critical people who will say, we cannot allow children to transition. Puberty blockers are the most evil thing in the world, and we must scrap them and banish them immediately, forcing people to go through puberty in the wrong body as they feel it, which is an incredibly traumatic thing to do, and leaving them in a situation where, as an adult, if they want to transition, it is a much more brutal process than if they'd never had to go through puberty in the wrong gender as in the first instance. So this is about trans erosion. It is the thin end of the wedge towards, I think, really trying to delegitimize both trans people and non-binary people too.
I mean, it's also important to say that, okay, so there are different estimates, but there are thought to be about 100,000 trans people in the UK, and only 6,000 of them have actually a gender recognition certificate. I guess the subgroup of people who had enhanced rights under the Equalities Act, as the definition was maybe perceived before, is small. Okay, so the difference it will make to most people's lives, I guess, on the strict legal interpretation, because I do think it has repercussions in terms of the message it gives society.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that worries me. But even on the particulars of the case, And I think most people are not fully aware of what the case was about, right? And the case was about representation on company boards. So it was what will be counted as diversity in terms of who sits on big companies' boards, okay? And we're now in a situation where a company board containing 5 men and 5 women, as newly defined, is considered just as diverse as a board containing 4 men, 5 women, as newly defined, and 1 trans woman. And that, to me, is, the perfect summary of how strange this situation has become, because it does end up considering trans women men for the purposes of this act. And it kind of takes things in the opposite direction. And I am thinking now, from a personal point of view, I do worry. Why won't there be an equivalent argument about banning gay men from male locker rooms?
Or lesbians from female ones.
Yeah. If you begin to perceive the safety of a space in terms of who is desirable sexually and who might be predatory, then why not go down that path? Trans men, as always, provide the sort of the height of the absurdity because they're always an afterthought. So in the judgment, there is a paragraph that says trans women will be excluded from female-only spaces because of their chromosomes, and trans men, fully transitioned trans men, will also be excluded from female-only spaces by virtue of their new genitals.
So where are they meant to go?
I am really trying. I am trying hard. And I know people who have these concerns about female-only spaces, and I'm not diminishing them in any way, because they flow from the same thing that you were describing, right? They flow from this constant lack of safety, this constant being made to feel uncomfortable, this constant predation by men and women. And I do understand where those concerns come from, especially when it comes to lesbians who want their own spaces and want them to be, specific to their biological sex, I guess. That seems to be what is coming out. But instantly, we've had a reaction from the British Transport Police that says, until they figure out their policy in the intervening period, starting 2 days ago, strip searches will now be conducted according to biological sex.
Right. So a trans woman has to be strip searched
fully
by a
transitioned
male
trans woman, 2 male police officers, actually, with possibly their body cam on.
Horrendous. And it's pseudoscience, Alex. It is pseudoscience. I mean, I talked about it earlier. We don't know much about chromosomal plurality, if you like. There are XYY chromosome human beings. There are many other variations of that. And of course, intersex is a thing. And the court has upheld the pseudoscience of the gender critical argument to say that sex is binary and therefore trans people effectively don't exist. And human sex isn't binary, and nor is much of the animal kingdoms. We're learning more and more about it all of the time. And courts don't rule on religious truths. So why are they propagating pseudoscience? And, it is just cruelly delegitimizing trans and non-binary people.
I mean, I don't know enough about the science. I'll be perfectly honest. I know it's constantly evolving. I know, that when you cite one thing, someone else will cite a study that shows something else. I do know that there are, the instances of chromosomal, I guess, abnormalities, but in the medical sense, if you know what I mean, are much more frequent than we think. There was a case of a teenage girl recently in Croatia that was showing signs that maybe there was DSD, I think it's called, even though she was born female with female genitals, presented as female, they had XY chromosome. And when they tested her, they found that that was the case. And when they tested her mother, they found that that was the case. So we're talking about a woman who has lived all her life as a woman and has had children as a woman, that under this legislation would be considered a man.
Would be classified as a bloke. It's ridiculous.
And so this is what worries me. What worries me is that it's a gateway drug to co-opt some well-meaning people into some really dark, far-right, genetic stuff. And that with all the goodwill in the world, listening, and I'm not saying this about everyone, I'm saying this about some of the people on the vanguard of this movement, as it were, that when I see the reaction to this judgment, it kind of confirms my worst fears. Because when you spend years saying this is not about denying rights to trans people, this is about safeguarding women's spaces, this is about safeguarding hard-won women's rights, and your reaction to this judgment is to take a selfie of yourself with a big cigar, treating this as if it's some light-hearted tribal victory.
No.
By emulating, actually, the trappings of the patriarchy.
Well, it's a very good impression of Nigel Farage, frankly.
I'm rich, I'm in a seaside resort somewhere in the Med smoking a cigar, and fuck you.
Yeah.
You know, that does not say to me that you were always aiming for a respectful, balanced solution that preserved dignity and equality and the rights of everyone.
Yeah.
That says to me you were just in a tribal battle to the death, and all you cared about was winning, and you now won, so hip hip hooray. But when that turns around, and it becomes the instrument by which, for instance, an unscrupulous employer, an aggressive litigant, could turn around to you, suing them under some provision of the Equality Act, and say, are you suing as a cis woman or as a trans woman, right? And you say as a cis woman, and they can say, prove it.
Yep.
And what do you do if you're, for example, a naturalized refugee with no access to those original documents? We're talking DNA tests, right? So why not everyone have DNA tests? And what happens with people who didn't know they had those chromosomal anomalies, right?
Exactly.
You know, you're opening a door to effectively a male society testing your womanhood. And I think people need to be really, really clear-eyed about what is happening here.
Well, we need to wrap up this section, but we're going to say it again. Huge love and support from us to our trans listeners, to our trans allies, and those with trans relatives who will all be feeling incredibly upset by this judgment and what it's going to mean for them potentially in the future. And we send you our love, our support, and our strength. And if you are gender critical, we will doubtless hear from you. Please try and take on board everything that we have said, and never ever forget that the vast, vast majority of violence against women is performed by cis men.
Quiet Riot. Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Quiet Riot. Well, we're going to move on now to the US, moving on from Ukraine. Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and top diplomat, Marco Rubio, have met with their European and Ukrainian counterparts in Paris this week to discuss efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged those at the meeting to put pressure on Russia to agree a ceasefire, as Russia uses every day and every night to kill. This comes hot on the heels of Trump refusing to condemn a Russian missile attack that killed at least 35 people, injured over 100 in the Ukrainian city of Sumy, describing it as a mistake, and once again blaming Ukraine for starting the war. Let's have a listen.
Have you spoken to President Zelensky, sir, about his offer to purchase more Patriot missile batteries?
Oh, I don't know. He's always looking to purchase missiles. He's against. Listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles.
Now, this was compounded by Secretary of State Marco Rubio warning that if this cannot be, quote, sorted in a matter of days, then the US will have to, quote, move on as it has, quote, other priorities.
I mean,
Alex, he was going to do it all in 24 hours.
Wasn't he? Yeah. It was all going to be done in 24 hours, and it's now in the too difficult bin, basically.
Yeah. Empty bravado, no plan.
He expected effectively everyone to just go, oh, Trump is in charge now, therefore we have to find some kind of ceasefire, which was a possibility until the moment America gave away its entire position in that fucking Munich conference. Until Pete Hegseth stood up and said that borders will stay as they are at whatever point the conflict is frozen, giving effectively Russia every incentive to push as far as it can for as long as it can before coming to the table, right? No NATO membership for Ukraine ever. And by the way, we're going to stop supplying you with weapons.
Trump, when he said that ridiculous, it'll end in 24 hours if I'm president, he never explained how. He had no diplomatic strategy. He had no peace framework. It was all just vibes and swagger. And the longer the war goes on, the more it exposes his line as just performative bluster.
Now, if for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. But hopefully we won't have to do that. And Marco's right in saying we want to see it end.
You can't art of the deal your way through a ground war involving nuclear powers. He never understood the situation. He never understood how far apart both sides were. And it is now becoming eminently clear to him he's bored. He doesn't want to be seen as this much of a failure. But if he doesn't want to fail or seen as a failure, and he does want to have a rapid end to it all, the most effective way is going to be to increase sanctions on Russia pretty quickly.
And give more weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah, of course. Putin's not waiting for Trump. He's escalating in the meantime, as you said. They laid out what their plan was, so to speak, as much of a plan as it ever was. And now Putin is going to just take, as much land as he can in the time available.
Did you know there's a really interesting thing going on here? Because I don't think it's that there was no plan. I think the plan was the swagger and the vibes.
Yeah.
I think he thought the swagger and the vibes would be enough to sort it out. So it wasn't that they thought, what are we planning here? We don't need to bother. I think they thought that was the plan.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the same thing with the tariffs. In a very, very strange way, Trump's unpredictability in his first term got him some quick results here and there. His unpredictability in his second term is weirdly predictable. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Like you don't know exactly what he's going to do, but you know that he's mercurial, he changes his mind every 2 days, and so people take him less seriously than they did before. And as a result, tariffs have been imposed, and he didn't get what he thought, which would be the whole world going, oh, please don't.
Yeah.
We'll do a deal with you.
And look, even his allies don't buy it. Like, if we're really honest, if European leaders, the Pentagon, Republicans in Congress even believed genuinely that Trump could end the war overnight, they would be clamoring to get him into the talks, and they're not. And I think that silence is deafening. And, meanwhile, his comments only signal to Moscow that a future Trump presidency, continuing Trump presidency, might mean cutting Ukraine loose, and that doesn't end the war. It hands Putin the win. And, especially for US allies, it's a real reminder that Trump's aversion of peace might just mean abandoning democracy in Europe.
But I find it extraordinary in that clip. He was saying that he has an issue with Ukraine asking to buy missiles now from private US arms manufacturers. And how are you going to is he going to actually ban export licenses by arms manufacturers to Ukraine while officially being either neutral, as he says, or an ally?
Well, the minerals deal is back on the table. And lots of reports that in the coming week that will finally get signed, which presumably is the opposite of that then, and is him giving Ukraine the right to use all of these weapons and up the supply of them to Ukraine. But I guess what they're saying is that if Ukraine don't sign that minerals deal, then we're out of here.
So do you think that's at the root of what Marco Rubio was?
Yeah, I think it could well be, yeah.
Telling reporters at the airport that, unless it happens in a matter of days. Let's have a listen, actually, to exactly what he said.
So if they're serious about peace, either side or both, we want to help. If it's not going to happen, then we're just going to move on. I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well.
You see, that's one interpretation. Another interpretation is because military experts think that Russia is preparing an all-out spring offensive. And another interpretation, a slightly darker and more worrying one, is that Trump is trying to wipe his hands of it all before that happens. Yeah. Then blame Ukraine, basically, for not taking a deal that was never there. And say, well, you wouldn't play ball, so now you've lost even more land.
Indeed. And look, I mentioned it earlier, I think the oil price is a real moment of weakness for Russia at the moment, whether they're preparing that spring offensive or not. Putin's war runs on oil, but because of sanctions and discounts, he's basically selling champagne at lemonade prices. The cash is still flowing, but the barrel itself is getting much lighter. I'm so firmly on Ukraine's side, obviously, but also have been very vocal about how weak I think the Russian position is, and we could and should be exploiting it far more than we are, and arming Ukraine properly to defeat him, particularly now because of the headwinds around oil prices that are making it more difficult for Putin to fund the war in the way that he had been.
And China, which is the other moving part, actually, because of what Trump is doing with tariffs, China is now on an all-out charm offensive with various South Asian countries and also Europe. It thinks it might have a way back into Europe's good books.
There was basically the Asian version of Davos last week. And for the first time in a very long time, you had the leaders of Japan and South Korea in Beijing. And the Asia-Pac region is really uniting in response to Trump and his tariffs and his assault on their economies, and they're not going to take it lying down. And that is remarkable. I mean, there's also talks about Taiwan even saying, actually, maybe we should surrender to China because we can't rely on the US to protect us anymore, because look at what they're doing globally in terms of retreating from situations that they don't feel are really...
And she was in Vietnam, I think, this week.
Exactly. So, the world dynamic is changing every single day, and Trump cannot rely on the old world order.
Such a massive own goal by Trump diplomatically. This thing with the tariffs, it's like it really is how to lose friends and alienate people 101.
Quiet Riot. We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss. Oof, like wind in your hair carefree. Oh, like using Clorox disinfecting all-purpose cleaner in the home carefree. Yes! Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox carefree. He's on a roll now. Spit toothpaste on the faucet. You got it. You got it. Peanut butter on the light switch. Oh, spritz, spritz. Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back. Use as directed.
Quiet Riot.
Well, that neatly takes us on to our third and final topic. That'll be quite a short one because it is about geopolitical realignment and people becoming friends again, in extraordinary circumstances. We often on the show talk about the need for safe and legal routes for those seeking asylum and refuge from horrendous situations, war, famine, and more. We still don't have them, but the government is now in negotiations with France with a tactic to try and disincentivize small boat crossings and smash the gangs. It is on a scheme to return migrants who have crossed the channel in small boats. And in return, the British government would accept migrants seeking family reunion in the UK. This is a quote from a spokesperson from the French Interior Ministry who said, "It is based on a one-for-one principle. For each legal admission under family reunification, there would be a corresponding readmission of undocumented migrants who managed to cross the channel." So, Alex, any scheme will involve this exchange, basically, of people who do not have a legitimate asylum claim for people who do. Could this satisfy the bigots, the Faragistes, the Suella Bravamans, or is this just going to be, a drop in the ocean to them, not enough?
I mean, can anything satisfy them? And the answer is no, because their political strategy depends on them being dissatisfied about this.
Yeah.
So when your entire electoral strategy, your entire electoral campaign depends on claiming, that there's some sort of invasion, then nothing will assuage that because it is there by design. It's like saying, can anything convince Nike that their running shoes are shit? No. The answer is no. Reform UK's survival as a company and a party depends on this issue. So nothing will ever be enough to satisfy them. There will be no version of closed borders that is closed enough. There will be no version of Brexit that is distant enough and hard enough. We know all this. But might it satisfy people sitting in the middle who are not fully fledged reformers, I guess, but are worried by what they see in the numbers, in the data? If something like this regularizes the situation, might it satisfy a chunk of those people?
I'm afraid not. I've been doing focus groups all week.
God. You're a barrel of laughs.
Yeah, sorry. It's not great news. People don't really care how they arrive. They just care about the numbers. They care about the overall numbers. So even when you're talking to them about things like youth mobility schemes and look, there would be young British people leaving, there would be European young people arriving, they then start immediately going into, oh, well, will they be able to claim benefits? Will they be able to access the NHS? And then you explain to them, no, they would not have any right to claim any benefit. They would probably have to pay an NHS surcharge before they arrive, and then they can use the NHS free at the point of use as you or I can, which then at least gets them around the whole aversion to, oh, they're paying to jump the queue, which is how some people interpret the surcharge. But then they just return to, but they would still be competing with me with that 8 a.m. dash to get a GP appointment. we still don't have enough homes in the UK, and more people will still mean, or the same number of people, if it's a one in, one out kind of scheme, would still be putting immense pressure on housing. So I don't think it will. I'm sorry to say. I mean, maybe Labour government has focus grouped it differently and found different answers to it, but certainly what I hear from voters is that it is very much about overall numbers. And I'm sad to say that this isn't just Reform UK curious voters or Conservative voters. This is also people who switched to Labour at the last election and people who have voted Labour for quite a long time over several general elections. There is a real aversion to population growth.
Okay, but is the argument quite as potent when you take away the element of jumping the queue, that nonsense that is constantly being presented? So you take away that, you take away the numbers living in hotels, because if you regularize the situation, it means that, people coming over here are able to work, they're able to pay tax. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
You take away that element that just sits in a hotel somewhere waiting for a decision that is in the thousands and costing in the millions.
Yeah.
So isn't there a slightly different flavor to the issue once you defang it in that way?
I think you have to spend a lot more on public services before before most people will be accepting of that. That is at the root of it. I feel poor. I can't access the things I want to access, whether that's homes or hospital appointments or whatever it is. And a real sense that, people from other countries who have lower wage expectations will have a deflationary impact on wages at a time when wages have been stagnant for over a decade, well over a decade now. I sort of came away from those focus groups asking myself, what is the Labour brand? And what do Labour think their brand is at the moment? Because what I hear from everybody is disappointment. And that is so rooted in how people's lives are. I feel sorry for a lot of the people that I disagree with when I hear what they say. They are living in poor quality homes. They are getting increasingly unwell. They aren't earning anywhere near enough to live a healthy and fun and interesting and fulfilled life. So, yeah, I think even if you were able to say, we brought the bill down and we're not putting them all up in hotels and there aren't so many people drowning in the Channel, that, until they tangibly feel that their lives are improving, there are just very few messages that will cut through with any sincerity.
And yet I feel we have to keep plugging away, because
we do.
On two fronts, actually. So there was a piece on the BBC website about the local mayoral elections coming up, taking little vox pops from loads of people in a particular area. And I was really struck by this, okay? And I read you now from the piece. Put off by Labour's record in government, lifelong Labour voters, Jill Cook and Jane O'Neill from Hessel say they may vote reform for the first time. Mrs. O'Neill says she has been hit by the winter fuel payment cuts and Labour rejecting any compensation for women hit by changes to the state pension age. And this is a quote. I keep thinking we haven't got enough money to do everything for everybody, Mrs. O'Neill said. And maybe we need to pull up the drawbridge, even if just for a little bit. And I find this really quite extraordinary, being expressed from someone who is retired, someone who is not working, is depending on the Treasury for their monthly stipend, okay, and complaining that they're not getting enough of it at the moment. And I find extraordinary that the mathematical reality does not occur to that person, that letting fewer working age people into the country will not improve the amount of money available for her pension. It will make it worse. Like fewer working age taxpayers. I could just about understand this argument if you're a brickie, right? And you're saying, pull up the drawbridge because my wages will get higher. At least you have a cogent personal argument to make.
Yep.
But for a retired person, a person effectively on benefits, to be saying, we need fewer working age people, and then the state will be able to be more generous to me.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to address that kind of upside down?
It's very, very difficult. And again, something across all of the different voter groups, and we did them all over the country, you know, the North, Wales, South, etc. And we've got to look after our own. We've got to put British interests first. We shouldn't be doing all of this stuff all over the world. We shouldn't be, interfering with things outside of our island while we have got so many problems at home. We need to look after our own. That is a retort that comes up and up again in different forms of word, but is essentially saying that our own house is not in order and we cannot afford to spend the time or the resource or the money on anything until we have fixed what is wrong here. And they cannot make the leap to, well, therefore we need to be doing more trade. We need to be having a workforce that will take up the vacancies that we have in hospitality, social care, NHS, etc. They cannot make that leap. It is fix the broken system in front of me that I'm grappling with every single day before you talk to me about anything else at all, even a US trade deal. Even, the things that those that tend to be on the right of British politics also seem to favour. There's an antipathy towards anything outside the borders of our island.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Spain, who has decided to go the other way, and say, immigrants, come here, we need you. They had 3.2% GDP growth last year, and are heading for 3.5 this year. In a world and a continent trending between zero and recession.
Yep.
So, I mean, hear it, don't hear it. All I can do is to keep saying it, right?
Yep, indeed.
So, on that note, sorry. It wasn't very cheerful today, was it? We were just
it was a real upper.
Well, that is a wrap anyway for our festive Quiet Riot Sunday School. So happy Easter, Christos Anesti, and Chag Sameach, and a shout out for Steve Bray as well, who triumphed in the Court of Appeal this week, which determined that playing occasionally loud music outside Parliament was a lawful protest.
Thank you for lending us your ears on another Sunday, and please do take the time to support this podcast in any way you can.
Now enjoy the long weekend. We love ya and hope to see as many of you as possible on Tuesdays. Ask Us Anything.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.